Welcome to Wannabe Clutter-Free, formerly Wannabe Minimalist, the podcast for busy families who are tired of the chaos, fed up with being overwhelmed, and ready to enjoy life again. Each week, we talk about how to let go of the clutter so that you can focus on the things that actually matter. And it's not just physical clutter. We talk about the mental and emotional stuff too, because if it's holding you back, it's time to ditch it. I share what I've done in my own life to declutter, organize, and calm the chaos, but you won't just hear it from me. There are amazing guests too. It's practical, doable, and simple for those of us that want to be clutter-free. You're listening to the Wannabe Minimalist Show with Deanna Yates, episode number 95. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Michael Bartz, tiny home advocate who is on a mission to helping the environment. We talk about his journey toward minimalism, decluttering from a traditional home down to a tiny home, and how this adventure had him looking at saving the world in a new light. It is an interesting conversation, and he definitely opened my eyes up, so I hope you enjoy it too. Hey there, my wannabe minimalist friend. Welcome back to the show. I'm thrilled you're here with me, and I am so excited to be bringing guests back on the show. I am always inspired by learning from others, and every time I speak with a guest, it encourages me more on my journey, so I hope they work the same for you. When I talk to people about minimalism and decluttering, the subject of the environment often comes up. After all, living with less does decrease your consumer tendencies, and it lowers your carbon footprint that we all hear so much about these days. I will admit, though, that I am no expert when it comes to green living, and that's why I was excited to have Michael come on the show today. Michael is the producer and host of the In Over My Head podcast, and he follows his journey to lower his environmental footprint by building a 175 square foot off-grid tiny home. He felt overwhelmed by trying to save the planet, quote unquote, and wasn't sure if all his downsizing and minimizing was really making a difference, so he decided to bring in the experts. Each season, he's tackling a different aspect of the environment, and it's just a really interesting concept. Michael and his partner Sarah live in their tiny home on a farm in southern Alberta, where when he's not podcasting, he can be found pursuing his creative endeavors of acting and writing, or being active in hiking in the Rockies. The information Michael presents is different than the cookie-cutter information we all hear all the time, and you'll hear me struggle with it a little bit, but that's why I love having guests on the show. It's a wonderful way to grow and learn. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I should have kept recording as we had a hard time ending our conversation and talked a little bit longer after I hit the stop button. So maybe I'll have to have Michael back again and we can dive a little bit deeper. So give it a listen and let me know what you think by heading over to wannabeclutterfree.com/95, and you can get the show notes there for today's episode with links to Michael's website and podcast. And again, you can find it all at wannabeclutterfree.com/95. And there you can also find my email if you want to reach out to me and tell me what you thought. Okay, now let's get to our conversation. Well, hi, Michael. Welcome to the Wannabe Minimalist Show. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Deanna.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. So this is super fun because I have to be honest, you are the first male I have had on the podcast. This is great. So
great.
I actually didn't tell you that beforehand, but you're the first one. So this will be really fun. So we are connecting today on more of a kind of a different aspect. I've been doing a lot of things with money lately, or furniture and decluttering, those kinds of things. And obviously we will talk about that today, but we are going to do a lot more toward tiny living and in the environment. And I'm really excited to talk about this because I haven't actually talked too much about this on my show. So why don't we start with you telling us, telling me a little bit about yourself and what led you to this tiny living world?
For sure. Yeah. So I'm Michael. I live in Canada, and I'm an actor by trade. And I also do a podcast, the In Over My Head podcast. And I also write and make films and things like that. And in 2017, I decided to build my own off-grid tiny house. And at that time, I was in my late 20s, and I had just come out of an 8-year relationship, and I was single. And I was kind of looking at, okay, what does life look like for me as a single person? And I thought about it a lot, and things that came out for me was like, all right, maybe I want to go back to school. Maybe I want to travel. Also, buying a house, I guess, is something I should probably do in my late 20s, be a responsible person. And I was thinking about all those things, and somehow that idea of tiny living came up in a tiny house. And to me, it kind of brought all of my ideas together, in that I could, since I'm building it, kind of go back to school in a way. And then I have this project, I'm learning, I'm growing. And then also I could travel with it because it's going to be on wheels. So I don't have to necessarily stay in one place because I didn't know what my life was going to look like. And then, of course, that idea of buying a house that on a foundation, a regular house, like, hey, now I'm kind of stuck there and into a mortgage. And I didn't want to just, I know you've done a lot of traveling and traveling is great, but traveling extensively and then coming back and just having nothing. And so the idea of having a home to come back to really, really resonated with me. But this way I could bring it with me. So it really was the best of all worlds.
I love that. Okay, so I love the fact that you took a big life change and you turned it into something positive. Absolutely. And those questions, right? I mean, especially in the 20s, right? When you're in your 20s, life is, you're still kind of figuring things out. And I do think that was such a smart move to, and how lucky are we now that this is a movement that has gained steam, that has gained popularity. It gives people the freedom, I think, to think outside the box and to do something that's a little different. So, I don't think tiny houses weren't really a big thing when I was in my late 20s. But no, it's awesome. We did an RV trip. Granted, it was with my parents over the summer, so that's a total different ball game. But yes, we traveled a lot, and in our way of doing kind of this, not buying the stuck house was that travel, right? I mean, we would do a month at a time in a different country, and it was a lot of fun. But you're right, we didn't have anything to come back to, and so yeah. Anyway, I think that's super awesome. How big is your tiny house?
It's 175 square feet. So
Ooh,
yeah, it's pretty tiny.
That's a tiny
Yeah,
house.
yeah, it's 24 feet long, eight and a half on the outside, feet
Okay, and
wide.
is it
So
still just you there?
it's me and my partner Sarah and our cats. So there's
Awesome. How many
quite a few.
cats?
We have three cats actually. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. But actually, a
Awesome.
tiny house is quite conducive to cats because there's lots of different spaces and different levels, right?
They
With the
love nooks and
stairs and other
crannies,
things.
right? And they always
Yeah, yeah.
crawl
A
into the
dog,
little ones anyway.
not so much, but yeah, the cats do okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So you said it was kind of that freedom that led you to the tiny house and also having something to call your own, something to come back to. But you also, I know you talk a lot about the environment, and is that something that led you to tiny living, and how has that shaped how you're living now?
Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely an aspect of living tiny that appealed to me, right? Because as a person who is environmentally conscious, I think about what sort of impact does my life have on the environment and how can I lower my environmental footprint? And the house you live in is really such a big part of that and the things you fill it with and such. So definitely moving into a tiny house was a big part of that. And also because I built it myself, being able to say I want it to be off grid. So what does that look like? Whereas if I had a traditional house in a city, there's a lot more that is involved with that as far as adding solar panels or geothermal or something. So with it being such a small house, I'm able to power it a lot more easily with solar as opposed to a 2,000 square foot house for that. So yeah, definitely that was a consideration, was the environment.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll jump into that a little bit more, but I want to go quickly. You were just said like you built it yourself. Well, how in the world did you, first off, what made you think like I can do this? Because I think that in and of itself is a big thing. And then how did you get started?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like we talked about, tiny houses even in 2017 weren't like a brand new idea. It was new, but there were still people doing it. So that really helped in my inspiration and my ability to do it because I grew up building things. I was always pretty handy. I After art school, I framed houses for a while to pay off my student loans, and so I knew how to build things, but I obviously like I'd never tackled such a big project as far as the plumbing and the electrical and the siding and the windows and everything that goes into a house. And it's even that much more complicated with a tiny house because as you've seen in lots of the probably photos on Instagram and things, you have to get so creative with the space. You have to put drawers in your stairs and everything has to be storage, and you have to obviously get rid of a lot of things. So in designing that space, it was an extra challenge. So for me, it was a lot of self-learning and lots of those YouTube videos of other people who had done it, who had been there already. I went to actually in Colorado, the National Tiny House Jamboree in
Hmm.
2016. I went down there, and it was a convention of tiny houses. So I got to meet people who were doing it and see tiny houses. That was actually a really big thing. Is it's one thing to see them online, but to actually be in them and see, okay, how does this actually feel? Because you talked about traveling in an RV. Like my parents have a 24-foot motorhome, and it feels way smaller because it's just the ceiling is maybe 6.5 feet tall, whereas I've got 10 feet on in my tiny house. So how that feels, that big open space, really impacts just your quality of life and how you enjoy the space. So as far as building it, like, yeah, it took me 4 years. So it was a lot of starting and stopping and figuring it out and how does this work and learning. So, and it was thousands of hours. So it was an accomplishment for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. There's two more things I want to talk about in there.
Okay.
First off, how did you just what was it that kept you going? I mean, 4 years, that's a long time. And I think I talk a lot about that with people in their homes. Like I try to say like you have to create this vision and that vision has to be really powerful to power through kind of all of that. I mean, it's hard to declutter. It's hard to get your house to where you want to be. And I can imagine that is like tantamount to when you are doing a tiny house or this giant project you have in front of you. How did you keep you know, how did you just keep doing it day after day?
Yeah, it's part of it was my partner Sarah, who I met early on in the build. She was very, very encouraging because yeah, I thought it would take me maybe a year. I'm like, yeah, I could do this in a year. And after a year, I was nowhere near being done. The framing was done, like some of the inside, but it was so much. And part of that was because I chose to build everything myself. Like I
Mhm.
built the staircase, I built the reclaimed oak countertop, I built the hinges on the door. Like there's so many little things that you not necessarily everyone does when they're building a tiny house. So there were times absolutely when I felt like I should quit and I should stop and this is crazy and stupid and it's just too much work. And that was probably maybe year one. And then eventually I just kept at it. And it was just every day just choosing to prioritize that project and just do a little bit at a time, right? And probably the same with
Yeah.
decluttering your house. You can't just do it all in a weekend. Like it just takes time and you have to just take it in small chunks. So I'm focusing on the framing this portion, and then the next part is the electrical. And then that's actually something that's nice about the house, I guess, in that project, is that I can't do the siding at the beginning. I have to do it at the end. I have to, there's certain steps. So that kind of helped in my progress. But it was a lot of mental work as well, just to be motivated to keep doing it. And especially because I didn't know what I was doing, right? It's like if I had done it 1,000 times, like, oh yeah, I got this, but it was a brand new thing. And I think it really comes back to that shift in my life when I suddenly was single and I had to decide what I wanted to do. Like it was such a profound change, and my life shifted in such a big way that this is what I wanted to do. And I decided to complete that project, and nothing was going to stop me in the end, even though in my back of my mind, I thought, like I can't do this. I never really wanted to quit, like for sure. So that's what kept me going.
Awesome. Okay. So, and then you also said the next thing I was going to ask was the fact that you and your partner live there. And I didn't know if you had lived in the tiny house by yourself at first or if you had always lived there together. So it sounds like maybe you had always lived there together once you finished it. Because I was going to ask, how did you then take your just your house, which was, in the tiny house, probably just all your stuff, and then bring another person into that? I think would have been really interesting. But you guys kind of lived there together the
Yeah,
whole
so
time.
yeah, so we met early on in the build. So yeah, we lived together in a regular house. Maybe it was like it's 800 square feet, but it was definitely a challenge to downsize even together in that
Yeah.
small a space, right? Like certain things, it was pretty easy, even in the kitchen. Say like it was easier to get rid of some items and not others. But I think I know for my partner Sarah, getting rid of her plants, like she had a whole bunch of
Mm,
plants that she loves, and they take up lots of space. And it's like, okay, now we have to really prioritize which plant. She had this big monstera that she loved that she had to, unfortunately, but she had to give it away. But she gave it to our friends. We've got two sets of friends who also love plants. It's like, you guys can just take care of these things. So it
nice.
was, yeah, definitely a transition, but I think it made it easier that we did it together. and,
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways actually I would have liked to have built a house with her and actually designed it with her,
Right.
because I met her when I had already started. And it's like, and I couldn't really change the house drastically. And even now, like when I started building it in 2017, I imagined, okay, you have your house where you live, but you go to the gym and then you go to your office, and you don't need all those things in your house. And then of course, 2020, that everything
2020.
changed, right? And now we both work in our living room slash guest bedroom slash office,
Wow.
in the tiny house. So that was an interesting journey as well. Suddenly our house got that much smaller, but I was actually surprised, even in 175 square feet, essentially a closet for some people, how easy it was to adapt. Where we never thought, oh, we're gonna have our office in our house, of course. No, but we made it work. And so it's really about that adaptability.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So, what has been one of your least favorite things about living in a tiny house? Do you ever find yourself staring into your closet, feeling like you've got tons of clothes but nothing to wear? Well, I've discovered a fabulous solution that's perfect for us busy women. Armoire. Armoire offers high-quality, unique brands tailored just for you. All it takes is a quick 5-minute style quiz, and voila, you get a personalized closet from which to choose. The best part, these stylish outfits are delivered straight to your door in just a couple of days. I just returned from a podcast conference, and Armoire saved the day when it came down to what to wear. I wore these super cute wide leg jeans from Paige to the day portion of the conference, and that night I wore cropped wide leg vegan leather pants and an asymmetrical striped sweater. I got compliments all night and had people mentioning my outfit the next day. Then I was able to simply send it back for something new. No clutter, no fuss, no special laundry. And it's not just about looking good, it's about feeling good too. Armoire is all about sustainable fashion, so you can stay trendy without the waste. Plus, it's women-founded and led, supporting women designers and aligning perfectly with our values of empowerment and community. Right now, my listeners can give Armoire a try and get up to 50% off their first month. That's up to $125 off. Just visit armoire.style/wanna. That's armoire.style, ARMOIRE.style/wanna to get up to 50% off your first month. And never worry about what to wear again. Try Armoire today. Hey everyone, today I want to talk to you about something that's helping me show up as my best self. Hormone harmony. For any woman navigating the ups and downs of hormonal change, whether you're in your 20s or past 40, this is something you'll want to hear about. I started taking Hormone Harmony because lately I've been feeling off balance, I was snacking more, feeling sluggish, and just not like myself. I was pretty flat. And that's when I found Hormone Harmony. It's been a game changer. It's not only for those of us that might be hitting perimenopause, but for any woman who feels like their hormones could be more in sync. Did you know a bottle of Hormone Harmony is sold every 24 seconds? Yep, it's that popular. And it's not hard to see why. This wonderful supplement is packed with adaptogens. These are science-backed herbal extracts that help your body adapt to stress and minimize those annoying hormonal fluctuations. So whether it's hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, or just feeling perpetually tired, Hormone Harmony addresses all of these symptoms gently and effectively. And for those navigating the tricky waters of perimenopause, it is nothing short of a lifesaver. The company behind Hormone Harmony, Happy Mammoth, is all about making women's health simpler and safer. Their products are sugar-free, gluten-free, dairy-free, non-GMO, and third-party tested to ensure the highest quality. And the best part? Women are reporting they feel like themselves again. If you're ready to start feeling like yourself again, I've got great news. For a limited time, you can get 15% off your entire first order at happymammoth.com. Just use the code WANNA at checkout. That's happymammoth.com with the code WANNA, WANNA, for 15% off your first order. Don't miss out on this incredible offer.
Yeah, I think for where we are, when I thought about that question, it was short showers. Like we have to have very, very short showers because we are off grid. So we've got a 72-gallon freshwater tank that I haul water and fill. So it's like the shortest showers possible.
Yeah.
But that's really more about being off grid, and not every tiny house is off grid. So I honestly, I can't think of anything that's my least favorite thing, actually. I think because I built it myself, I designed it. I put thousands of hours and love and patience into this project. It's like a child. Like I can't not love this child. And so we just adapt and work with it. And I guess there are limitations, obviously, with space. One thing I think about is we like to, in the before times, host people, travelers, oftentimes through couch surfing. We loved hosting people. And so I purposely planned as I said, the living room, office / guest room. We've got a couch, which I'm sitting on right now, and it actually converts it into a queen size guest bed so we can host people. So we might host people for a night or two, right? People are traveling through, but I couldn't imagine, like, my partner Sarah's from Spain and her parents are looking at maybe coming over at some point and visiting, like, for 2 or 3 weeks. We just couldn't do it. It's like, we can't be, putting the bed apart
Right.
and again for weeks. So there are limitations that way, but in some ways I see that as an advantage, because it's like, oh, sorry, we in-laws, we can't host you and have to get a hotel, but it's all good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. All right, I'm going to circle back in a minute to the water, but what would you say to people, or I'm sure people tell you all the time, they find out that you live in a tiny house and they go, oh, that's amazing, but I could never live in a tiny house. What's your normal response to that?
Yeah, I see that as kind of two different types of people. I think there are people who say, I could never do it, but they want to. And to those people, I would say, yes, you can. You just haven't tried hard enough. Like, if give it a try. Like, I'm not a special person by any means. I'm a normal person. And so if I can do it, you can do it too. Then there's probably the other type of person who says, I could never do it and I don't want to. And you know what? That's okay too, right? As even being a minimalist, right? You can be a minimalist in a regular house. You can be a minimalist with 2 dogs and 3 kids and a cat and all sorts of things. So you don't necessarily have to live in 175 square feet to be a real minimalist. So I would say to those people, keep living your life and come visit.
Maybe I'll change your mind. I love
Right?
it. Perfect. Yeah, I hear it all the time myself. So, I could never have a capsule wardrobe, or I could never
Sure.
declutter all my stuff, or it happens. But I think you're right. I do think there are the two people. I've never really heard it put that way, but I think you're
Hmm.
totally right. Yes, they do secretly want to do it, and they're just afraid of what would happen, afraid if they let go of the stuff, afraid of they couldn't change back. Like, I do think change is really hard, because you
Hmm.
think, but what if I prefer what I have now versus what I'm changing to? But what I say to that is, like, it's all, I mean, life is constantly changing. You can't stop it from
Hmm.
changing. And you can always make another change. You could change back, go a little bit, keep the things you like, and get rid of the things you don't. So
Yeah, people
love
think
that.
like it's this big, huge permanent change, but really we could just sell the house and move into a regular house. It's not nothing is permanent. You're right. And one thing I love about tiny houses is that one size doesn't fit all, and that's great. There are people who have for 2 dogs and 3 kids and the cats in a tiny house. It's a bigger tiny house, and that's actually where the trend is going right now,
Yeah,
to triple axles, to bigger tiny houses, because yeah, there's
interesting.
just people who want to do it, but they can't live in 100 square feet. It's just not feasible, but they still want to maybe reduce their clutter or their environmental footprint. And how do you do that while still maintaining your quality of life? So yeah, there is definitely that room for flexibility, and even in tiny living.
Yeah. All right. I want to step back now into environmental friendliness, because I know
Hmm.
that's a big thing. And that's a lot of what your podcast is about how we can live better with the environment. And so one thing that I have been trying to do, not successfully, so I would love your tips on it. I was going back to the water. So we'll get to that in maybe in a minute, or I don't know, we can talk about it now, or if you have any big tips. But so you have a 72 gallon tank, yes?
Hmm.
How often do you fill that up?
It lasts about a week, sometimes week and a half. Yeah. So
That's amazing.
mhm.
Okay. I've got
Short
to
showers.
figure out okay, short showers. We don't take long showers. We have a
No,
tiny shower. Although I do have a kiddo, and she likes baths. She doesn't like showers
sure.
yet. And that is a problem. It's a
Yeah.
big problem. But I don't bathe her every day. So that's kind of my
There we go. Yeah.
like, well, you only take baths twice a week. So
Yeah.
we're not to that point yet where you have to bathe every day.
Mhm.
What are some other ways you have? Well, actually, let me ask you this one first, and then we'll get into maybe more tips that might work for the rest of us. What is the craziest way you've tried to lower your carbon footprint?
Yeah. So obviously, like, living in 175 square feet off grid is already crazy enough.
Yeah.
I think of kind of there's other elements of environmentalism. Two things that come to mind are transportation and how we get around. And kind of a crazy thing we did last summer is that we did a holiday trip to Fernie, BC. We're in Alberta, which is about a 300-mile round trip. And instead of driving, we decided to take our bicycles. So we biked for about 5, 6 days in total from Alberta to British Columbia. And yeah, that was really interesting. And in that way, we wanted to, again, lower our environmental footprint of traveling. But like and I've done bike trips before, so that wasn't our first time doing it. Sarah's it was, but I find traveling by bicycle, it's just such a more enriching experience. We stopped places we normally wouldn't have. We saw things we wouldn't have seen. You're getting exercise. You can eat whatever you want because you're just burning so many calories. And so it just like shifting that mindset of like, how do we travel? How do we get around? And yeah, we can do a 300-mile trip by a bicycle, right? Like, yeah, that would have taken a day or two to drive, but it was just such a fun time, and we definitely want to do it again. So that's probably one of the crazier things I've done recently to lower my footprint.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. But you kind of have inspired me of like, what could we do just even around town?
Sure.
Because, I have an 8-year-old. We're not taking a 300-mile bike ride, right? I mean,
No.
there are considerations in life, but could we, instead of hopping in the car, I mean, I live in Southern California.
Sure.
Nothing is close. That part
Yeah.
sucks about here.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of benefits to here. Public transportation, the ability to ride your bike, not
Yeah.
necessarily one of them. But is there some place we could go? Like, could we ride our bikes to the beach, or could we ride our bikes to go get ice cream instead? Yeah, are there ways we could work that into our daily life? Absolutely.
Yeah. And especially having
Fun.
kids, like
I like
making it
that.
an adventure too, right? Like other than just
Yes,
a chore or a task. Yeah. Or an adult. You
absolutely.
can make it an adventure as an adult.
Everything can be an adventure, even
Yeah.
if you're older like me. Maybe we get back into some things that people can do. Like, if so someone like me, I need to cut down on our water. I'm not quite sure. I feel like we are pretty conscientious about our water, but
Mhm.
looking at my last water bills, I can't even think what it was at the last time, but I felt like a really bad human being when I looked at the water bill and I was like, how are we using this much water every day? So for someone like me that's living in a house that I'm not, like, what are some good ways for us to start lowering our, carbon footprint, being more environmentally friendly, being better, stewards of our environment and our resources?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a complicated issue, and that was the reason for doing my show. It's called "In Over My Head" because that's how I felt when I want to save the planet. But I don't know if any of
Yeah.
this stuff even is effective. So, um, yeah, and like that water example, the reason that have 72 gallons last a week or sometimes 2 weeks is because we just have to. Like, it really forces us. Like, because I have to fill the water physically, I have to like take a tank and go fill it up, and it makes it an extra step, and it's not always easy. Sometimes it's a real pain, but it
Mhm.
just really makes you very conscious of how much water you're using. And in a regular house that most of your listeners probably live in, that's just not a consideration at all, right? And that's something I really find fascinating. And thinking about that question, um, I could tell you to turn down your thermostat, or maybe bring your reusable mug to the coffee shop, and that would make a difference. But that's nothing new. And actually, I don't think that's the right area to focus on because, like you said, you feel like a bad human being when you're using water. It's like that doesn't seem very healthy to me. So,
Right.
well, actually thinking about this question, I thought about two things that are simple things you could do that you may not normally hear, and I think actually are going to have a bigger impact. And that's really based on the conversations I've been having with my guests. And so, forget about turning off your lights and all these small things that you have to keep up with day to day. So my first advice would be to actually get curious about climate change.
Hmm.
And by that I mean, like, stop tuning out the news, stop thinking that this is a horrible thing that's just out of my control. Get curious about it and start to think about, okay, how does climate change affect me and my community? Even don't even think about the world, because again, you're going to feel in over your head. So get curious about climate change, and maybe that looks like education. So maybe you start listening to a show like mine or another environmental show. You could read different books. A really great book that I've enjoyed is called A Citizen's Guide to Climate Success by Mark Jacquard, and that really frames the problem and how we can solve it, and some of the it debunks a lot of the myths. So I would tell you to get curious about climate change. And then the second thing that I've learned is to talk about it. There's so much power in face-to-face conversations. It's not about yelling at someone on Twitter or something. It's talking with people about, okay, this is something that impacts me, and it's not necessarily about me always just using a little less water, because although I think those things are helpful and they're good, not everyone is going to do that, and not everyone can. If you have children, you can't just, we're going to bathe once a week, everyone. Like, you have a certain quality of life, and I don't think that you should have to sacrifice that. So talking about it to your friends, your family, and then of course the larger picture, maybe your government representatives, to say that this is something that matters to me, and let's change it, and here's how we can change it. So focusing less on that personal responsibility and more on the collective action is something that you can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating. And you're right. I mean, those, if we can focus on a bigger problem, that might, make the bigger impact, right? And if we can, right, because if I turn off my lights, but my neighbor sure doesn't, then
Yeah.
is it really helping?
Yeah.
So,
And then not even,
ah,
and some people can't, right? Because
right.
if you're a truck driver, or you work in the fossil fuel industry, or you just carbon is so intertwined into our lives, as far as even just shipping something on Amazon, or
Mhm.
anything, right? And I mean, me living this way, us living this way, is still sending a message saying, hey, this is where my values are, and I'm going to walk my talk. And I think that's very important. I think we should still keep doing those things, but I don't think we should be every day beating ourselves up about, oh, I didn't ride my bike today. Like, well, yeah, like we've talked about with decluttering, like it's a process, and it takes time, and there's these little steps you have to do, and yes, you can do all those things, but if you don't every day, I mean, yeah, don't beat yourself up about it, but write a letter to your representative saying, hey, we need to get to net zero by 2030 or 2050, and it's important to me and my community, and this is what we need to do to get there. That bigger change, the regulations, the getting everyone involved, is so much bigger than just personal responsibility.
Right. Interesting. Oh, I love looking at it from that perspective, because and still, I think we all still need to do the things that
Yeah,
we can. Like, I don't
sure.
think that we can skirt our personal responsibilities and say, like, oh, well, Nestle's still just taking water and, reselling it. So that's fine. That's a big thing here.
Okay. Yeah.
um, sorry. Right. Right. Because they don't pay for the water. Like, we pay for the
Sure.
water. They don't pay for the water that
Oh,
they take,
yeah.
and then they resell it to us. So then we're paying 3 times. Like, it's
Sure.
crazy. Yes, right. Those big things make those big impacts, but then also take a shorter shower. I don't need to take a 15-minute shower. I don't take a 15-minute shower. I get ready in like 5 minutes, but
Mhm.
like, don't take a long shower. Try to, we're going to try to start running our dishwasher a little bit less, and I don't know, put the gallon jug in the toilet so it doesn't use as much water, and all those kinds of things. So,
Yeah, you can absolutely, you can make changes to your house and to your life that are being more environmentally friendly. But I think the big part of the reason that I felt that in over my head feeling overwhelmed was because then you think about, all right, well, I want to put solar panels on my roof,
mhm.
and where did those come from? Probably from
Mm,
China, and then there's
mhm.
resources that go into that. I want an electric car. Okay, well, how about all the batteries, that the energy that takes to create those batteries, and the waste, and there's just so much involved. So
Yeah.
although these things are good, I think people sometimes it's misguided. I think, if I'm saying that correctly, like, yeah, you
Mm,
want to make the biggest impact you can, and I still think, like, talking to my guests, that personal responsibility just isn't where it's at. I think, yes, living your values, great, but yeah, there's so many things you could be doing, even environmentally, even energy efficient light bulbs, for example, right? Like,
right.
how, like, the resources that go into those, and so you're having to like compare and do research on light bulbs, and it's like, and how much anxiety are you causing yourself by stressing about your light bulbs at night, and where with your example with the water, right? Yes, like,
Right.
you, there's certain things are out of your control per se. You can't necessarily regulate where your water comes from, or how your city deals with water, but that can change. And I think that there's that collective action problem as well, right? Like, how can
Right.
we work together? And it is a combination of things, but I wouldn't put the focus on necessarily every single day trying to do that. And I think, but that being said, when I talk about getting curious about climate change and then talking about it with people, my two amazing tips for you, by doing those things, like, you're naturally going to take shorter
Right.
showers. You're naturally going to look at, yeah, maybe we do want an environmentally friendly washer, a more energy efficient one. So it sets you up for success in that way, that you're not trying to figure all these things out. What do I need to, how does my food impact my carbon footprint, and how do my kids' diapers or whatever, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, just get curious and go, okay,
Oh,
well, yeah,
yeah.
how can I even just start with one little thing, one little area that you want to
Yeah.
maybe try to look into and improve.
Yeah, we went through that with the diapers.
Sure.
Oh gosh. So we did
Right.
cloth diapers for the first year, then we traveled when she was a year,
Hmm.
and we switched then to disposable because obviously we were traveling. And so yeah, but it was anxiety inducing for
Right.
sure, because you think, okay, I'm gonna use cloth and it's gonna be great and it's renewable, but then you're using water
Sure.
and all the detergent and all the stuff that then, so they almost offset each other.
I'm Margaret.
And I'm Amy.
And together we host the podcast, What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood.
Margaret, I would say you're sort of a where are my keys kind of mom.
Correct. Sometimes a where are my kids kind of mom. Well, you're, Amy, more of a we were supposed to leave 35 seconds ago, mom.
I mean, touche. In each episode of What Fresh Hell, we come at a topic from our usually completely opposite perspectives. I bring the research.
And I bring kind of the gimlet eye. Like, is that research really going to work, people?
And almost 10 million downloads later, we're still laughing.
We also talk to experts in the parenting field, plus parents with stories we can all learn from.
We make each other laugh, we challenge each other's assumptions, and we have what we think is the best parenting community on the internet.
Check out What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood wherever you listen to podcasts.
Right.
That is
And you
crazy.
feel
And so you
in
just have
over
to,
your
like,
head.
it's so hard to decide what is the lesser of the two evils sometimes.
Yeah, right. And then there's 1,000 decisions you have to make every day about that stuff. But
Right.
then you go look at, like, your Nestle example, you look at,
Yeah.
okay, well, the big polluters are actually the ones that are making the biggest impact, and
Right.
we're just letting them do that. And, and even, go back to education. So in talking with my guests, I found out that in Canada, about 80% of our power is actually made by renewable energy already. I
Hmm.
didn't even know that, right? And so looking at that, it's like, I mean, I live in Alberta, and that's one of the places that has, like, we're working on it, but there is still quite a bit of coal here. Looking at that, like, even within the tiny house or a regular house, instead of you saying, well, I have to put up solar panels, I have to do geothermal, like, well, what if your power is already being generated by renewable energy on that, call it upstream, um,
Right.
further down the line? Maybe you don't have to put that personal investment in, and if you really, really want to, like, maybe there are subsidies to do that. So, like, it's a big issue. And as much as, yeah, you want to focus on those little things, I think that really trips people up, and it also puts the responsibility on individuals,
Right.
and that's not necessarily productive, because then you go, well, I have to do all these things and that person's not. And, well, in the background, these big companies are huge polluters. Let's focus
Yeah.
on them. Let's put the problem where it actually lies, and in fixing those problems, that's going to make our lives easier. Because I think for me, I would love to never talk about this again, right? To never, like, have to, I could just live in a 2,000 square foot house and take a shower when I want. And, like, I, as much as I enjoy this lifestyle and I enjoy, inspiring other people to do the same thing, I would love to live in a world where we didn't have to think about this. We just
Right.
made our power by renewable energy, and it was clean, and there was no pollution, and that's amazing. Like, how do we get there instead of worrying about these little nitpicky things that, although they help, they're not the biggest problem.
Right. So one thing I do encourage people to do, though, is I try to encourage people to not rush out and buy new if they have something that works, right? Like, it's tough because when you declutter, I think you go through this process of feeling guilty about all the stuff you have and getting rid of it. And then how do you get rid of it? And can I recycle it? Is it still usable? Can I give it to somebody else? Does that then create a problem for them? So again, we're doing like this decision anxiety bubble, right? That we were kind of talking about with how I can make my house better. But I do think that if we can live with less, and one of my favorite ways to do that is actually just to buy less in the first place. So you kind of use up what you have. Um, how do you feel about that? And where else do I want to go with that? I guess let's just start there. How do you feel about that? Or I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. Yeah, something I did want to talk about in our conversation when you look at downsizing and decluttering is where does that waste go? And as much as I say, like, don't focus on the little things, like don't just go just crazy. And actually that was an example I was thinking of, possibly a negative consequence of decluttering and downsizing. Like when the Marie Kondo craze hit, like everyone was just
Yes.
en masse getting rid of stuff, and they were giving them to thrift stores. Like, that's great, I'll give it to a thrift store. But then they couldn't deal with that volume. So now a lot of good items were going in the trash that didn't really need to, right? And then potentially if someone just en masse got rid of a whole bunch of stuff, and then 2-3 weeks later they think, oh, actually I need that thing, they went and replaced that thing that they didn't actually need to replace. So yeah, you definitely, when you're looking at decluttering and minimalism from an environmental lens, you definitely have to be mindful of how you're getting rid of those things. But yeah, I think, and you've probably talked about this with other guests, just going about that, getting rid of things. Yeah, give it to someone else, if that's possible. We have a policy in our house basically of like, always buying used first if possible, right? So can I get something that already exists in the world? I don't have to order it new, and that helps in getting rid of waste in landfills, but also our environmental footprint.
Yeah.
And then talking about buying things, like we have that buy me once kind of philosophy as well, where buying quality actually, even though it might cost a bit more to start with, you're actually saving money and also saving resources, in that you're not replacing that thing after a year or two that it wears out and it breaks. So you can definitely get rid of things and declutter your life in an environmentally friendly way. And it doesn't have to be anxiety inducing and overwhelming.
Yeah. And I think too, with that education piece that you were talking about, kind of educating yourself to knowing what's going on and understanding, there have been some really interesting documentaries about, or just kind of, videos about like the life cycle of stuff. So I think that's really interesting. I'll link to that if anybody's interested. But I do think that like part of me is like, I just get so angry that like one person, Bezos, has so much money. So I try so hard to not buy something on Amazon, and it's gotten somewhat difficult, right? Because then you have to go around to like different stores. You have to drive to different stores. I mean, you can get stuff online from like Target, but then is that much better? You kind of have that problem. But I do think there's one positive here. Amazon has gotten so terrible to shop on because you'd never know the quality of the stuff you're going to get.
Sure.
And like, I've done that, right? I've purchased something where I thought it was good. I've gone through the reviews. I've tried to pay attention to what I'm buying, and then I get it and it's total crap. And so I actually think that's a positive, and I'm hoping that more people have that experience, and then they just think, oh, I could live without that. It's awful, right? I don't want to use that. And then maybe they can live without it. I don't know. I'm slightly optimistic that this will trickle through, but I'm not sure it will.
No, I've had the same experience where I buy something online, or on Amazon specifically, and yeah, the quality isn't there. And that kind of goes to another element of at least the environmental side, is like buying locally and buying from someone that you know and something you can see. So that's another big part is like when I order, sometimes I read books or the research for the show, I go to a local bookstore. So now I'm supporting the local economy, the community. I'm still getting the book that I want. I'm not giving it to Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a process. And like you talk about education and trying to, obviously not buy things in the first place. I think part of my transition to downsizing was also about like transitioning to an artist lifestyle, and also limiting my I went from a well-paying job in post-secondary to nothing. And so like, how do I live comfortably on less money? And for me, that also kind of tied into the environmental side. So instead of buying a book like that, I'm going to go buy this book because I've got the money, or put it on credit, whatever. I would look for, can I find it somewhere else from someone else? Can I find it online for free? Just download it. Like, are there other ways that I can do what I want to do without spending money? And so I think that also ties into the minimalism and decluttering as well. Like, instead of just a gut reaction, and that's of course why Amazon does so well, because they have just like 2 clicks. I'm just going to buy this thing. Great.
It's one click now.
Or one click, is it? You don't just think about it. You don't have to click it. You just tie it into your brain. And so like instead, like I talked about with the water example, like if you can kind of build in those barriers to buying something or using a resource, if you have to think about it, if you have to, instead of, let's say, for example, this would be a little more extreme, but if you just sold your car and just said, I'm going to bike everywhere and that's it, like you don't have an option to drive because you're going to choose the driving option. You're going to choose the easiest option. You know, if it's easy, you can do it, you're going to do it. And so if although it's a little more difficult, if you can kind of build those things into your life, I find that's kind of a bit of a life hack in that you make it a bit more difficult. And by the time you're going to do that thing, you've already decided that, hey, I don't actually need that book at this time. I don't need to buy that thing. And you're better for it.
Yeah. And just a little way I do that in my house. Like you can do this with lots of things, but one even little way that I do it is I have a dresser behind me in my office, and I have my printer in the top drawer. So it's not sitting out, it's tucked away, and I can use it when I need it. But I found that by tucking it away, I actually use it a lot less. Like I was sometimes just being like, oh, I can just print that off because then I can make my notes on it and blah, blah, blah. Well, now I'm using less paper. I'm using less ink. It has just a slight little bit of discomfort. Like it takes me 20 seconds to pull it out of the drawer. The plug's right there. I plug it in. I take my laptop. I plug it right in. It's not difficult. And yet even just those little things, just a little discomfort really can kind of make that just kind of stop you from doing that knee-jerk reaction, like we were saying. So
you're lazy. People are lazy, and that's good.
Totally.
That's a good thing.
We are. And I try not to get down on myself for being that way.
No, it's good though. It's that build it into the day. It's like, I know I'm lazy, so
yes,
make that work for you.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I definitely want to ask you before we go, and I don't know that I have prepped you for this one, so sorry, but what was your decluttering process like? I don't know what your life was like before you decided to move tiny. Obviously, it took you 4 years to finish your house, so you had kind of time to prepare. I don't know. I'm one of those people, though, that if I have a deadline, I'm a procrastinator. I totally am, and I will wait until the last minute to do it anyway. So I don't know. What was your process like, and how was it? You said you were living in 800 square feet, so obviously you were already kind of small, but you went to 25% of your square footage. So talk us through it.
Yeah, no, you're right. And because it took 4 years, that made the transition a little bit easier. It wasn't like one day to the next, like, oh, I'm living in a tiny house now. Oh, shoot. Like it was a slow transition. So part of that was at that time when I was building, not accumulating more things, because I knew that, okay, we are downsizing. I know that's coming. I'm not going to buy that big screen TV. So kind of that helped with the transition. And then really, I think the biggest thing was actually moving on to the farm where we live. And we moved with all our stuff, essentially. We didn't put everything in the house to start. So we just moved with the house empty. And then we started filling it up and kind of seeing what fit and what didn't. And that really helped in the decluttering process, that we went through it and said, you know what, like I said, the Monstera we knew wouldn't fit, but other things we just, what fits and what doesn't, and what do we need and what don't we need. So it was a bit pragmatic for sure, kind of maybe even before the move. As with any move, I'm sure that you eventually just start throwing stuff like, I don't need that. I don't want to pack that. It's another thing to move. So we probably got rid of a few things there. But once we actually moved into the house, that was when we really realized how much space we had and how we could work with that. So I think if we had to, when we move again, if we do, it'll probably be a lot easier move because everything's in the house. We can kind of just pick it up and go. And I mean, that being said, we live on a farm and there is some extra space. We do have a few other things in another house on the property. So even though we are downsizing, we do have a few other things. Like we don't live with every single item. We don't have 100 items in our life or something. And I think that's also, going back to that personal responsibility, especially, being in Canada, we have 4 seasons. We've got lots of winter, we got summer. We like to bike and we like to ski and we like to hike. And how do you fit all those activities into your small space, right? So prioritizing those, but also being realistic that, sometimes you can't fit everything in your tiny house, and that's okay.
Oh, I appreciate the reality there. I appreciate the realism that, you don't often see that kind of behind the scenes. And that was one of my questions. Like, we have taken on new hobbies. We moved to San Diego a couple of years ago. We've taken on new hobbies. We have a surfboard now. We have paddle boards, and we sold our snowboarding equipment, but we'd love to buy that again. And, it's kind of those things of, how do you deal with that kind of stuff, and knowing that you only have a certain amount, but being real about it and being like, okay, well, this is the stuff I love, and I can store it in the off
Mhm.
season, and I can get it when we need it, and he can swap that stuff out.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the realness there, because I
Good.
think
Yeah.
sometimes people try to say, but it's perfect. I have 100 items and
Yeah.
it's
Right.
great.
Yeah.
And you're like,
I just
like,
meditate all day and I'm fine.
yeah.
Yeah. Like,
And
yeah.
even
Yeah. And then
when
I
we
think like
traveled, oh, go ahead.
you,
Yeah.
we talked about buying quality too, right? Like if you're buying things that last, you're more likely to keep those things and take care of them. And, our outdoor equipment is a good example that we've invested quite a bit into that. So
Right.
we're going to take care of it. We're going to keep it. But talking about some of your outdoor gear, it's not always available in every place you live, but sometimes there are like sharing economy type things where you can rent certain things. If that's another thing is like, instead of
Right.
buying that paddle board that I want to try, like maybe rent it, try it out. Maybe you like it. And if you like it enough to do it a lot, then purchase it. So
We
are
actually
there
did
ways that
that.
you can,
Yeah.
are there ways that you can, rent things, even tools, things like that,
Oh,
try
for
them
sure.
out, just instead of assuming that default, I have to buy this thing. Now you're, again, limiting your environmental footprint because you're not buying a new thing.
Right.
You're making use of something else and potentially stimulating the economy. So there's all sorts of things you can do in that realm as well.
That's true. Okay. Well, next time I go snowboarding and I rent from Blowers, I'll think, hey, I'm just
There we go.
helping the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm stimulating the economy.
There we go.
Don't mind the extra hour it takes to get the stuff and return it. But again, right? Slight inconvenience may be
Sure.
worth it.
Yeah.
And I was going to say back to kind of that realism point, like when we traveled, right? We traveled with carry-on suitcases, but that is just part of it, right? Like I rented an Airbnb that was
Sure.
fully furnished, that had a
Yeah.
furnished kitchen, that had everything that we needed there, had all the linens, had all the stuff. So it wasn't like I can just live, I'm not pitching a tent everywhere I go. So those are kinds of the things, though, I think that people can get wrapped up in the persona that they see from people on social media. And it's one thing I don't want people to feel bad about themselves or compare themselves and feel like they're not measuring up or not doing good enough, because there's always a little bit of story. So that's why I was really
for
happy
sure.
about the realness there.
Yeah. It's I think a good term I've heard is like the purity test. Like if you're not 100%, like I still drive a car. I still, like I live in a tiny house, but I don't have like a zero, like just, if you want to lower your environmental footprint the most, you just kill yourself basically. Because then you have zero footprints. Yeah, like we have to live. You have to live your life a little bit and then be conscious about it. But yeah, I think being real about it also gets more people on board, because people who just can't or don't want to change, they don't have to beat themselves up. They don't have to live in a tiny house. They can still do their part and not sacrifice as much. And if people want to travel or live in a tiny house, great. What does that look like for you? It doesn't have to look like what my life looks like, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, so good. Well, Michael, I know people are going to want to follow up. I know they're going to listen to your podcast. And so where can people find you?
Yeah, if you go to www.inovermyheadpodcast.com, that's where the show lives. And you can get it also on all the various podcast sites. But I don't use social media, and that's maybe another conversation, but I intentionally chose not to do that. So you cannot find me on social media. Sorry, but you can send me an email and I will probably respond, because it's a real person. So send me an email, info@inovermyheadpodcast.com. But yeah, listen to the show, and that'd be great if you can learn something.
Absolutely. Okay. And then my favorite way to end every interview is with 3 rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what does minimalism mean to you?
Yeah. So minimalism to me, I think, talking about housing, it's about making room. Sure, that could be having fewer physical objects, but that also extends to your time and your mental space. So making room for the people and the projects that fill your heart with joy, making room in your mind for being in the moment, not being distracted. So that's what minimalism means to me.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one on Mike from my guest. I like that. What is one of your favorite pieces of advice that you'd like to share today?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one, and I think just for me and my project in the tiny house and environmentalism, like we kind of talked about, not beating yourself up and not like putting the work in. Like I think people really underestimate how much work certain things like the house required. 4 years, thousands of hours. Making a podcast, as you know, lots of work. So when you're looking at any sort of decluttering, downsizing, any renovation project, anything, like it's going to take so much more work than you think it will. And to be prepared for that. So set yourself up for success by saying, yeah, it's going to take twice as long. So I'm prepared for that. And by doing that and sticking with it, you'll be better off. Was my thought. That's what I came up with.
That's a good one. Hey, it's only one of your favorites. It doesn't have to be the best piece or, your favorite.
It was a tricky question.
Your favorites.
It's a big
I know.
one.
Sorry. I do kind of do that sometimes. And then what is making you happy right now or in this season of your life?
Yeah, I think so. We moved to the tiny house last spring, so it's been almost a year, and shifting there, moving on to the farm. So we live on a farm in southern Alberta, and the owners are in their 80s, and they're still farming. And to me, that's just so inspirational. So meeting them and seeing that you can be in your 80s and still be doing something you love, I think is so inspirational. And building that community. So I do kind of odd jobs to pay for the spot on the farm, and it's just been such a rewarding experience. We love it here, and we love that little family that we've built here.
Oh, so good. Well, that is a great way to end it. So thank you so much for joining me on the Wannabe Minimalist Show. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Deanna.
Absolutely. Cheers. Wow, I just loved this episode, and I had so much fun talking with Michael. It was just as much fun when I listened to it the second time while I was editing it as it was the first time in the conversation. I love how he opened my eyes to the idea that while we should, of course, live our values, and that might include being good stewards of the environment if that's important to us, the most positive change we can advocate for is making big policy changes, because the biggest polluters are not individuals, but large corporations. So if this was eye-opening to you too, I hope he has inspired you to get curious and contact your local representatives to see what changes can be made. You can find the link to Michael's website and podcast in Over My Head in the show notes or on my website at wannabeclutterfree.com/95. Again, that's wannabeclutterfree.com/95. And that just about wraps it up for today's episode. But before I go, I do want to take a minute to thank you for listening to this podcast. If you liked this episode or found any episode helpful, please consider leaving me a review on Apple Podcast. It makes my day and it helps me so much. I hope you have a fabulous day, and I will see you again here next week. I'm Deanna Yates, and this is the Wannabe Minimalist Show. Cheers.